This meeting is now being recorded.
Okay, there's our official verification. So if anyone wasn't able to join us today or you want to be able to go back to it later, that will be an option. I'll send out an email later with exactly where you can find that recording. Again, if anyone had problems connecting or signing in, please just send me or Courtney an email and we can make sure to troubleshoot with you. Right now, you should be seeing a tree on your screen. Once the presentations get going, you'll see those presentations instead. But again, if you're having any sort of difficulty, please just shoot me a question and answer. I also just really quickly wanted to thank everyone who responded to the Google Drive survey. We did not have full participation, which was to be expected, but if you still had any sort of very strong thoughts about the group using Google Drive, please send me an email and let me know. I can let you know out of the people who did respond, most of you either like it or feel somewhat ambivalent about it. One person suggested using Dropbox, which I'm certainly open to exploring, but there wasn't consensus around that idea at this time. And I do want to remind everyone that the CLPHA conference is October 23rd and 24th, which is a Thursday and a Friday. There will be a special time for the working group to meet, so we would love to have all of you there. That time will be on Friday, which is the 24th at 12 p.m. On Thursday, we'll have a special panel that's dedicated to education issues. And Courtney will also be giving an update of this group at the meeting. Other than that, the next webinar for this group is November 18th at 2 p.m. So going forward, starting with November, all of the webinars will be the second to last Tuesday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And the calendar is available on the Google Drive. Okay, so now I'm going to be turning it over to Courtney to get our presentation started.
Hi, well, I just have to say many thanks to Abra for getting this platform up and running, and do let her know or send a message on the platform if you've got any technical issues. We're going to try to resolve those as we go through this. But I'm super excited that we have moved from having working group phone calls to having working group webinars, and that we're able to highlight each other's work and think about what other work we're interested in learning about over the course of the year. So I'm happy to be able to facilitate the call today. And as Abra stated, I'm going to be giving just a short update at the CLPHA meeting on what this working group is, some of the topics that we have covered, and some of the topics that we hope to cover over the coming year, knowing there's just a ton of work happening around the intersection of education and housing across the country, and we can learn a tremendous amount, I think, through engaging this type of platform and calls and emails outside of these opportunities. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. We have 3 presentations today, so we're going to move at a pretty steady clip. I want to make sure that Ted is ready to go. He was having a couple technical difficulties, but if Abra, you can get his piece up and loaded. We'll start with Ted December from King County Housing Authority, who will be talking through King County's data sharing practices and challenges. And then we're going to move from Ted to Karen from New Haven Housing Authority, and then on to Melissa from Home Forward, which is Portland's Housing Authority. If you have questions, we encourage you to use the Q&A, and as Abra said, you can use the Q&A at the top to answer any private questions. Abra and I can see those. If there's a common question, we'll respond to those in the public chat, which is on the left-hand side. So we'll try our best to facilitate this call so it's smooth and informative for everybody, but we're super open to feedback. I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and have Ted start his presentation.
All right, can everybody hear me?
You're good?
Yeah, they're muted. Go ahead.
So, yeah, thank you, Courtney and Abra, for getting us going today. I'm going to try to cover a lot, and I only have a few minutes, so please do ask questions if you have them while I'm going through the content. Here at CLPHA, we have data sharing agreements in place with 3 school districts, Kent, Bellevue, and the Highline School District, which serves 5 different cities in South Seattle, Burien, Normandy Park, Des Moines, and some other ones. Each of these districts are part of a larger coordinated effort called the Roadmap Region, and the state has received dollars from Race to the Top in all of that effort, and data sharing is a critical part of that partnership with these districts, including Race to the Top, figuring out data sharing. CLPHA has kind of moved ahead and formalized our own agreements. So there's a lot going on here in the Puget Sound area around data collection and data agreements between housing authorities and CBOs and school districts. Brief historical context for data sharing here at CLPHA. Efforts really began around 2010, and the process started with our executive director, Stephen Norman, and Linda Hughes, who was my predecessor as the manager for educational initiatives, and key district leadership, including superintendents. And in these early conversations, it was critical to get the big players in the room from the very beginning, and a key part of these conversations was just to keep in the front of everyone's mind that we are talking about changing possibilities for a group of children who have the lowest performing scores in the system, and that by working together, the housing authority and school districts, we have a better chance of breaking the cycle of poverty. Here at CLPHA, Stephen Norman has said many times that you can't build your way out of an affordable housing crisis. And what he means by that is that we can't only build buildings, we have to improve systems. And a key part of improving systems is having data to drive what you're doing. At these first meetings, demographic data was shared. We shared how we wanted to know how CLPHA students were doing in school, so that we could create strategies to start working towards improved academic achievement for the students. We had a working assumption that the roughly 1,000 students that each of these school districts had were the same 1,000 students that their schools were the most concerned about. So we shared with them that we have a common interest in these same students. Each of these planning meetings, it was agreed that some data sharing needed to occur so that we can move the dial. Linda Hughes met with each of the 3 districts that we have arrangements with over the course of 2 years, and our first agreement was actually in Kent. This process consisted of numerous meetings. It looked a little different in each district. For example, in Kent, she was working directly with the school district's attorneys and legal department. In Highline and Bellevue, the school district acted as an intermediary, so we were actually talking to executive directors, and then they would go back and talk to the lawyers and then come back to us. So the format was a little different, but the substance was the same. And the process, took a lot of guidance and a lot of hands back and forth over the course of the 2 years. So here are some education initiative steps. And so when we're presenting initially to school districts to try to start a new partnership, this is something that we share with them as to what our process looks like. And so in those meetings, we kind of walk them through what these steps would look like, and it helps just create a common vision for what we're really trying to accomplish. So we've discovered in the first process with Kent that we needed more expertise in pulling and analyzing the data from the districts. We simply did not have the capacity for the complicated work. We learned that using a third-party consultant was good for us, but that it was also what the school districts preferred. It was easier to allow a third party behind their firewalls to better ensure that data was remaining confidential. And in this format, we only receive summaries of data. And, you know, the third party has, like I said, more expertise than us in analyzing, managing data. They're the ones who actually hold and manage all of the data from the school districts. They act, you know, kind of as a neutral party where collecting, analyzing, and storing the data. They ensure that information remains confidential, and they have the expertise and the capacity to work efficiently and effectively with the technology and the various staffs of the different school districts that we're working with. You know, so essentially they talk the same language, you know, in terms of data and technology. The third party can pull data and store it to be analyzed, and they basically create a bank. And so when I have different data requests, I just go to this third party and basically tell them what data I'm looking for, and they put it in front of me. So it's quite a nice arrangement. In Bellevue, the district had our consultants sign various confidentiality agreements to disclose how and when data was stored. So that's a little bit of the historical context. So the actual agreements themselves, in the agreements between the school districts, we state that the Housing Authority's educational initiative goals will be focused on 3 outcomes or steps leading to these outcomes. So those are school readiness, academic achievement, and the reduction of the academic achievement gap, and dropout reduction. So, you know, this is the guide for the entire agreement. The Housing Authority and the district share a commitment to these goals and to the greatest possible results for students. So we've entered this data sharing agreement to accomplish this goal. So to track progress towards these goals, we collect data on indicators such as on-time graduation, student attendance, student disciplinary actions, student school mobility, academic achievement, student performance on one or more portions of state assessments. So that's the data that we're looking at to track progress towards those 3 goals that I mentioned just a minute ago. So the types of data that we receive, so in our agreements we describe 2 types of data being provided to the Housing Authority. Type 1 is non-identifiable student data. So this is data provided in a form that can be cross-analyzed with other descriptors. And type 2 data is personally identifiable student data. And through the agreements, the Housing Authority has agreed that all type 2 student data provided by the district under these agreements are provided by consent with the students and their families, and everything is in conformity with the restriction of FERPA. So type 1 data, so again, this is the non-identifiable student data. So these are the points that we're getting from schools. So as you can see, students' age, ethnicity, gender, their grades, dropout status, as well as self-reported preschool and Head Start participation, absences, and disciplinary and reported incidents of discipline. So these are all of the various data points that we're receiving and analyzing. Our third-party consultant works with the districts to get these data sets once a year for the preceding year. The whole process takes several months, and it's a lot of going back and forth between our third party and the school districts. And it's usually not until around December that we have data for the previous, actually it's almost 2 years behind. So there's quite a bit of lag, which I'll talk about in just a second in terms of the current data we're looking at. And then once the consultant gets the data, they clean it up, they do some analysis for us, and they present it to us in reports. Since we pulled the data twice now, we have some cohort data that we're tracking, and we're linking that to individual student data to further analyze their student performance. And I also want to note that we have created these individual release forms that we're using for our Type 2 data. So this consent form is mutually agreed on by the school districts and the housing authorities. The release allows us to work with individual students to develop programs where we can monitor their performance as a group. So, for example, second graders as participating in a high school tutoring program. So with these releases, we can see the performance of each student and the whole group. It's quite nice. It's a lot of data to look at. So how are we using the data from our agreements? So we take the reports that I mentioned that we get from our consultant, and we work with the 3 working groups that have formed in each of our place-based initiatives. And this is done in various ways with different partners. There's always a lot of sharing of the data at these work teams, and we use the data to determine the strategies for increasing performance. We share this data with associated boards, stakeholders, families, individual principals. And, just like what's happening in schools, KCHA is working to become a data-driven organization. So for us, that means examining the data, reflecting on our goals, and our overall theory of change, creating theory of action, and implementing cycles of inquiry to determine if our interventions are supporting our theory. And then again, just like in a school, this means having difficult conversations, thinking about professional development for our after-school partners to support their growth, and making sure we're using all of our time effectively. And then I'll have an example of this, but we're also creating data dashboards that are used as a quick reference in displaying progress towards goals. And then the plan is that once we get really good at creating these dashboards, knowing what data we actually want represented, we're going to take some of this on in-house. And the housing authority is going, so my goal is that we can build our own internal capacity to start working with this data a little bit more. So the next steps for, so some challenges along the way. So this whole process has taken a lot of time to get in place for different reasons, but ultimately, making sure that we're honoring is the main challenge. And the school districts and we at the Housing Authority want to ensure that the rights and privacy of the students are protected. So 5 years ago, this was totally new, so partners were cautious. There was a lot of learning to do. Trust had to be put in place. And then on top of that, inside of Washington State, there's many education initiatives now in place for communities, and lots of agencies and groups are wanting this type of data. And districts are now beginning to think about the data that they're sharing and how they're sharing it in new ways. One option on the table as part of the larger roadmap effort is a menu that groups can access, including us, to see different types of data. But as the landscape changes, how we get the data and what data we get will also be in a change and adaptation mode. So it's very dynamic. Another challenge is cleaning up the data from the schools and the housing authorities and then connecting these data sets. I just started in July, so I haven't gone through the process yet and I haven't actually seen, the data dump. But my understanding is, that it's basically a massive data file that has to get cleaned up before any analysis can be done. So some of the messy aspects of this is like locating missing kids from the data. This might be because a name is spelled differently in the school district database and the housing authority database. So if someone has an I in their name instead of an E, that data is not going to get matched. And so we have to dig into it and figure out, why our numbers aren't matching. For example, in Bellevue, some of the reasons for unmatched records are a lag between KCHA data and the school district data being pulled, children that are in KCHA housing but actually attend different districts, something as simple as parents writing in the wrong digit for birthdays and things like that. So just a minor error can cause quite a headache. So it takes a lot of work to clean everything up. So that's a challenge. Another challenge is that school data systems are dynamic. They're constantly evolving. Each of our partnering districts are in the process of updating their own systems for tracking data. And so it's just a constantly evolving process. And then tied into that is helping school districts, and I think they're there now, but initially having school districts understand why we wanted this data and why we needed it now. Our requests weren't necessarily high on their priority list. That has changed, but initially that was a barrier. And then another challenge is just thinking about how we're using the data with our partners to build capacity for understanding data and using it to inform their own practice and their own programming. So here at KCHA, our next steps, we're really excited about the future. We're kind of at a unique point with our data agreements where we have, like I said, 2 years of data, and so we're really able to do some really cool analysis now and really start talking about trends that we're seeing and exploring root causes and things like that. We're going to continue ongoing conversations about the use of data with our school districts and our partners, having conversations about what data is actually important and why is that important, what measures or indicators of success towards the goals, how are partners using data to adjust their programming, how do we streamline the whole overall process. And another thing that we're working on is how we ensure that we get families to sign these individual release forms so that we can better track progress. And then it's also amending current MOUs to stay current because districts are here in Washington State are using new tools to evaluate student progress, and we need to make sure that our MOU and our agreement includes these new data sets. And so we actually had to amend an MOU for Kent to make sure that we could get some WAKIDS data, which is kindergarten entry and over-the-year progress monitoring. So those are our next steps. And then I have here, so this is just an example of our data dashboard. And so you can just kind of see what that is, the type of data that we're tracking for progress. And I think that's about it. I'm sure people will probably have questions, but I think my time is up.
Ted, thank you so much for giving such a thorough overview of what's happening with King County Housing Authority. We had a couple questions that came up on the call, and I'm going to raise them really quickly, and I think there are questions that I hope the other two presenters can touch on too. One is just around funding. The funding, if you have a quick answer to how this is funded and the funds that are being used to support this work. And then the second is family engagement, if you have a family engagement component. If you could just answer those within like 30 to 45 seconds.
Yeah, I think that the easy answer for the money is we're moving to work agency, and a lot of financial resources are going into this. It's a huge mission of our executive director. It's foundational, so I think, he's making it happen and finding the money to make it happen. And then in terms of family engagement, it's something that we're working on. How do we track family engagement? What are indicators? And we're working with our CBOs to build their capacity and their understanding for family engagement.
Great. Ted, thank you so much for your presentation. If anybody has additional questions for Ted, we'd encourage you to either touch base with him individually or pose a question and answer on our web platform, and we'll try to follow up on that. So now we're going to transition to our next presentation by Karen from Elm City Communities and New Haven Housing Authority. Karen, are you with us?
I am here.
Great. Well, we are really excited to hear about what is underway in New Haven. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We have about 15 minutes, between 10 and 15 minutes for your presentation, and then we'll have our last presentation. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. The Housing Authority of New Haven renamed itself Elm City Communities a few years ago. We transitioned in 2009 in an attempt to capture a broader scope that represents the work that we're trying to do here. We, too, are a moving to work agency. We've been moving to work since 2001. And one of the pillars of our moving to work program has been using our funding flexibility on a very robust self-sufficiency program. We launched the initiative that we call Hannah Believes this year, and it's our focus on student achievement as a part of our self-sufficiency initiative. The thought really being that the way that we're going to break the cycle of poverty for these families is by preparing our children for high school graduation and post-secondary success, and that we have an important role in doing that. So while we want to be in the business of housing, we don't want to be in the business of housing the same generations of the same family, multiple generations of the same family. It's called Hannah Believes because it's rooted in our belief that all of our children can excel, that all of our children simply need opportunity and resources in order to achieve what they're capable of. And that this initiative should be deeply rooted in partnership with our various school partners and with other community providers, as well as partnership with the families and the young people themselves. So we have three main things we're trying to do as we focus on trying to increase the academic achievement of our children and reduce the achievement gap. We're trying to support the parents and families so that they're in a position to support their children's academics. And we're trying to launch our children, connecting them with appropriate post-secondary opportunities. And we believe our theory of change really is that we believe that we can leverage smart housing policies in ways that will advance our academic outcomes for our children. This slide sort of outlines the number of different things that we're trying to do. Hannah Believes is really rooted in school partnerships, the largest being with our New Haven public school system, but we have a really rich array of other academic opportunities for children, including charter schools, a regional school district, our adult ed partnership as well. And so we are executing agreements, which include our data sharing agreements with each school that we bring on as a school partner. We have rooted the initiative that we're undertaking in our initial review of the aggregate data for how our children were doing. And none of us are probably surprised that our children were struggling academically, struggling in terms of attendance and truancy issues, and demonstrating behavioral issues that were disproportionate to their percentage in the school system. And so we designed things that were meant to address attendance and truancy. We designed things that were to address their academic achievement and in day-to-day school performance and standardized testing. We designed things that were designed to increase parents' ability and guardians' ability to support their children and be engaged in their academic achievement. And then a set of initiatives around trying to help our young people launch to their next opportunity. Our New Haven Board of Ed MOU or data sharing agreement was rooted in a statement of joint beliefs. This was somewhere that the Board of Ed really wanted to start. And so I summarized here just some of the grounding principles that we agreed with our Board of Education were the sort of tenets of our partnership. And they're guided around helping our students rise on a set of expectations that we have around our children and serving our children, and joint statement of belief on data sharing, so that we believe that the sharing of data is one of the most powerful resources we have to leverage in order to build meaningful supports for our children and ensure their success at school and home. And this was important as a sort of cornerstone or even foundational piece for us being able to move into a data sharing agreement with our largest partner, the Board of Ed. We found that the larger the partner, the more challenging the issues around data sharing were. We had smaller charter schools that jumped on very, very easily and quickly to a data sharing agreement, and then the large public school that needed to work through many more issues. Our initiative is targeted at about 7,000 young people that are served by the authority through both our public housing and housing choice voucher programs. And just for context, in looking at our representation in our overall public school system, we make up about 30% of the New Haven public schools. And so that was certainly a selling point around engaging in discussions around data sharing and partnerships in general, because we do represent such a large proportion of the student body, and the fact that those kids were demonstrating some significant challenges. So there was incentive all the way around to try to partner and think about ways to improve their performance. The data sharing agreements that we've entered into have the basic goals that are laid out here. That we have a shared commitment to protecting the data against any unauthorized use or disclosure. The second goal is really to enable the school and Elm City Communities and HANA to work together to improve the academic achievement of our children and to remain consistent with requirements as outlined by federal law. That we want to be able to accurately measure the impact of what we're doing. So we wanted to have baseline data, and we want to have regular ability to assess the impact of the things that we're doing, and then to establish the terms and conditions. So we lay out in great detail what the data points are that we'll be collecting, the frequency that we intend to collect that data. We are in year one of our data collection and analysis. This is our first school year. But the frequency and the ways in which we'll share that data, the uses of that data are all spelled out in our data sharing agreement. Just in terms of sample of some of the things we measure, we're looking at the performance on state standardized testing. We're looking at classroom performance, grades in classes, discipline referrals, in-school and out-of-school suspension data. We look at graduation rates for our young people. We're looking at the number of children that are making it from 8th grade to 9th grade. And those that are graduating, we're looking at those that are making it to college. And we're looking at retention in college rates. So our young people that make it to freshman year. We're tracking them throughout their college career as well. We are looking at students, particularly those that engage in our adult ed program. We're looking at those students' completion of their GED requirements, and we collect a whole host of demographic data, special ed classifications, their primary language, and whether they're receiving any English language proficiency services. We're tracking whether they're on track for graduation, the type of coursework that they're taking, entry and exit dates of school, absentee information, discipline and other discipline as well. And am certainly open to any, in terms of the two questions posed earlier, this is funded through a combination of the flexibility that we're able to achieve through moving to work. So we have designated some of our own money through this, through the Moving to Work program. We have also been able to receive a special appropriation out of our state legislature to support some of the work we're doing on truancy and connections with adult education. And then we seek outside sources through foundation and other grant opportunities to support the work that we're doing. And parent and family engagement is a huge piece of this. It's one of the three legs of the stool that we think will be useful in leading to successful outcomes for our children. And we engage parents in any number of ways. One thing that we think we can do well is be a communication broker between school and home. And so we do a lot of making sure that the information that comes out of the school system makes it home. We do that in a lot of traditional ways. We're using technology. For families that are on the internet and email, we have email networks. For many of our families who may not be using email but do have even non-smartphones but can get texting, we're exploring text for education programs where we can text information to our families. We have parent support networks that are designed to both support a culture, an environment of achievement and school success, and also provide support for families so that they can help their young people. We address the adults' own educational needs as well so that they can be better advocates for their children. And
Karen,
I'm open to any
go ahead.
I'm open to any other questions anyone may have.
So Karen, you covered a number of the questions that have been raised, and thank you for touching on the parent engagement and the budgeting piece. What we're going to do is transition to the next presentation, and then we'll come back to a little bit more Q&A for our presenters, and we're going to try to ask some questions that have come up commonly among the different presentations. So thank you, Karen, and we're going to go ahead and transition to Melissa from Portland Housing Authority.
Yes. Hi, I'm Melissa Sensala. I am actually the MPW program analyst for Home Forward. Rachel Devlin is usually on these calls. She's the strategic partnerships and planning director, but she asked me to take this one for her. We sort of work on the data sharing agreements initiative together, so I am covering for her today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got started with our data share agreement. We are probably not as far as some of the other agencies are with data sharing with our schools, and we've sort of gone a different direction with it. And so I'm going to cover some of that stuff today. So we really got started with this several years ago when we adopted our new strategic directions. And those strategic directions included a focus on services for our children and youth. We have about 10,000 children and youth living in our housing. And as we started to consider different programs to develop, we realized that we had a lot of ideas, but not so much hard data behind the things like school performance or attendance, things like that we were considering. So at the same time that we were looking at that, our local community was starting to convene a more concentrated effort on raising the bar around supports for youth throughout the community. And so that includes our 6 school districts. We have 6 school districts in Multnomah County. And we also had early education providers, other service areas like DHS. All of those people came together and started to talk about more of a strategic set of goals and sort of strategies around providing more supports for our youth in our community. So even though Home Forward isn't really so much a direct service provider for children, we consider our client to be the parent of the family, not so much the child. We still made sure that we were present at these discussions and worked kind of to find ways to be part of the conversation and contribute where we could. We had talked about doing individual releases with families, asking each family to give us permission to talk with the schools about the situation, how the child is performing, things like that. But we've been going in the direction of sort of a less intrusive direction here. Through things like rent reform, we no longer collect a lot of the information that's standardly collected from families. And so we're trying to make a real effort as an agency to be a little less intrusive into people's private lives. And agency leadership sort of agreed that we didn't want to go that direction and ask people to sign more forms and give us that sort of access to their private life. So we instead asked the districts to consider doing aggregate data sharing with us. Since we'd been at the tables talking about the community goals for our youth, we knew that everyone was focused on a couple of really common goals, especially for early childhood. Improving on-time kindergarten registration was the first big focus, and the local community has started a Register by June campaign promoting early registration. And the thought behind it is that it lets families connect with their schools, and we have lots of summer programs for kindergartners, incoming kindergartners, to sort of get familiar with the schools and their teachers and things like that. And it also helps our districts plan for staffing, and so they don't have, 30 kids show up when they're only prepared for 15, that sort of thing. So there's a big push around getting kids registered by June. The second real focus is improving attendance. Oregon has one of the worst attendance records in the country, and we've had a couple of articles recently, a couple of studies that are showing that nearly a quarter of students in the state miss at least 10% of school days, and that's referred to as chronic absenteeism. And we all know that that's very closely linked to low performance scores and higher dropout rates. So we knew that these were two of the big focuses of the community's work. And even though our relationship is with the parent, we thought pretty deliberately about where we could make an impact on those things. So our role in this is very unique, especially with the kindergarten registration, because we know where kids are before they start kindergarten. The school districts don't have any contact with families until they've actually done the registration, but we know where they live and we know how old they are. So we set out to help with that specific goal first. We went to the school districts and basically said, we have these goals in common. We are also interested in helping here, and this is what we can do. So one of the big things that we went to the school districts with was the actual number of kids that we have living in our housing. And we have about, when we're just looking at kindergartners, we have about 7% of Multnomah County's kindergartners living in our housing. So we approached the school districts with this information. We've been told a number of times from different partners that school districts really don't understand how to partner with us. They don't know how to use us. So when we talk to the districts, we really make it a point to tell them what we can do. And we make it a point to say that we serve a lot of kids and we know where they live. And, frankly, we have the attention of their parents. Their parents pay attention to us. So we say, when we went to the school districts, we said, here's how we'll help, and we will do this in exchange for aggregate data from you, just to help us evaluate how we're doing so that we can see what the outcomes are, help to justify costs, that sort of thing. So it took at least 2 years to get the first MOU executed, and that's because it took that long to build the relationship with the right person. So we really worked to find a good contact within the schools, someone who cared and someone who understood really what we had to offer and could sort of think a little bit outside of the typical school box maybe about what we could do. So we worked really hard to build that first relationship and to get buy-in from someone with the school district who would vouch for us to get that MOU executed. And we were really concentrated on the fact that even if at first we had to do the work without the data, that's what we were working for. We were working for an exchange of data. So our first MOU was with the largest school district in the county, with Portland Public Schools, and that's because that is where we found the open door. That's where we were able to build that relationship. So we worked with our contact at Portland Public Schools and agreed that we would do our part to help improve the kindergarten registration, and then eventually agreed that in exchange for that work, the school would provide us with aggregate data about kindergarten registration rates for our kids compared to all of the other kids in the district. As far as the actual program of kindergarten registration goes, from our standpoint, it's a relatively simple one. We run a report of all of our families who have a child who will turn 5 on or before September 1st of the next school year, and then we send them a letter or 2 or 3 and the materials from the district. And basically it's just a letter that reminds them that they need to register their kid for kindergarten. It includes the address of their local school and any materials the district has provided. I think in 2014, that was our 3rd year of outreach, and we sent letters to about 700 incoming kindergartner families. And funding for this kind of isn't really even a thing because it's such a sort of simple program. It's very basic outreach. You know, somewhere I have the number of how much paper we print and how many stamps we send, but for the most part, it's very simple. We do also ask that our resident services providers contact families who live at public housing properties and sort of engage families at that level, and that seems to work really well. So once we've done our side of things, we then ask the districts to send us the data, and we send them the names and addresses of all of the households we sent the kindergarten registration info to, and they provide us with aggregate information. And that information includes the registration rates of our households and then the rest of the district. As I think King County said, there's a lot of challenges in this information. I have to be really persistent to get the information back from the district, and it's not always in the format I need, and a lot of the time there are pieces missing or stuff that maybe doesn't make so much sense. So the first year that we got the information back, we found that our kids increased their registration rates much faster than the rest of the school district. Overall, home forward registration improvement increased by 14%, and the rest of the district increased by just 1%. So that was a huge jump for us and a lot of a positive impact for us. And once we had that, we presented it to the board, to our board, and then took it to the community. And when we were able to sit down with the other 5 districts and show them the impact that we had, those districts very quickly signed MOUs to share the same data with us. And this year we finished our 3rd year of registration throughout the county, and this will be the first year that we can do a full analysis, which will happen sometime over the next few weeks. At the same time that we did that, we also took our registration data back to the original 1st district that we worked with, and they've been working with us more and more every year, and we are about to we have our first data share and are about to get the data for attendance rates for all of our kids, kindergarten through 12th grade. So we are, again, going through the same thing, building our relationship. We've found a common goal in the attendance now, and we're really explaining how we're going to help on that side. We're being very deliberate about what we can do to increase attendance rates, and again, exchanging our work for the data. It's been really hard to get to this level of partnership, and it wouldn't have happened without a lot of perseverance, but I think both the school districts and Home Forward are seeing a lot of positive benefit from that. So with that, I talked really quickly, but I'm hoping I got a lot of information out there. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Melissa, thank you for your presentation, and thank you to the group for participating through the questions that were posed. One question that has come up earlier, which I'd just like you to speak a little bit about in probably 30 to 45 seconds, is just a little bit more about funding and parent engagement.
Are you posing that question to me, Melissa?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Melissa. Sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. Originally, funding for this was part of our MTW fund, but we really actually haven't needed it very much. I do the work kind of on the side. It's really quick and easy for me, and it's just considered a regular resident services role. It's just part of their activities. As we move forward with attendance work, we will probably look more at funding undoubtedly through MTW flexible funds. And same thing with family engagement. Right now it's pretty minimal because we've really only been focusing on the kindergarten registration, but once we start some sort of attendance focus, I'm sure it'll change.
Great. Thank you. With that, we're almost at time, and before I transition back to Abra, I just want to say thank you to our presenters for taking the time to put together such thoughtful presentations. We have just over, I think, around 28 different participants on this call, so I think that there may be other questions that come up, and we'd encourage you to touch base with a specific presenter that you may have questions for. These materials will also be made available, and Abra has recorded this presentation so it can be accessible too. And I'd like her to talk a little bit about how one goes about accessing that. And then the last thing is that the next webinar, for those of you who missed this at the beginning, will be on November 18th at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. So with that, Abra, can I transition back to you?
Yes, thank you. I want to echo Courtney's thanks of all the presenters. I think there's a lot of really great information in there. I will be sending a follow-up email with very clear, hopefully very clear instructions on how to access the recording of this webinar, as well as just a reminder that all of the presentations and the materials that some of the rest of you sent regarding your own data sharing agreements and experiences with data sharing are available on the Google Drive. I will send another link to that. Just very, very quickly, everyone should be seeing in the top bar where it says poll to the right of Q&A, there should be a question there for you about if you are attending the upcoming meeting. Are people seeing that? Courtney?
Yes. Oh. Yes, I'm seeing it. I think I'm figuring out how to respond.
Okay.
To
so we're
question.
just trying to, one of the members on the call today suggested trying to get a sense of who might be attending the meeting. If it's not working for people, then we can just figure it out for next time.
It looks like we have 8 people who have responded so far, 3 people who are a yes and 5 who are a no. But that we know we have 28 people on the call. So
okay, well,
maybe.
I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes if people want to go ahead and respond to that poll. But otherwise, please look for my follow-up email, and if you haven't yet registered for the conference, you still have time to do so, and we would love to see as many of the Education Working Group members there as possible.
Great. Thank you, Abra.
Thanks, everyone.